Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So, this is Liquid Margins 49. And if you're new to Hypothesis and the Liquid Margins series, this is a podcast, a video podcast series that we do occasionally, a few times throughout the semester, focusing on specific topics related to social annotation. So today's discussion is how to get students to actually read course materials and enjoy it. And one of the inspirations for this session has been a challenge that we've been hearing about from many faculty, learning designers, people involved in higher education, the problem of how to get students to read, especially if they are being assigned digital course materials such as scholarly articles via PDF, e-text, and so on. We know that our students are doing a lot of screen reading, and there are benefits and challenges to that. So this Liquid Margins episode is exploring strategies to actually get students to read, and we are joined by a couple of great Hypothesis social learning innovators, actually. So the two panelists who will be joining us today have received our Social Learning Innovator Award, and we're really appreciative and happy to have them today. A few housekeeping items before I do introductions. So this is a webinar, and we do want to hear from you. We have our chat um, available, and you can message the hosts and panelists directly if you'd like. But if you are sharing ideas, questions, comments, we would love for you to use the Q&A section in the bottom navigation bar. And that can be, you can locate that. There's two little chat bubbles with Q&A next to it. So we would love for you to Thanks, Bob, for noting that. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to enable it. Are you able to message hosts and panelists directly? And if not, feel free to share questions and answers in Q&A. But in the meantime, we would love for you all to introduce where you're coming from today through the Q&A. We'd love to hear the kind of different geographical places where our participants are joining. So if you want to try out the Q&A area, we'd love to see you and greet you through Q&A. Thanks for beginning that, Bob and Jeff. And a couple other notes. So for closed captioning, just a reminder to see closed captioning, enable it via the CC icon in the Zoom menu, which is located at the bottom of your screen. All right. Great, and thank you everyone for chiming in here. Wonderful. Okay, I'll give a couple more seconds for people to introduce themselves, and then we will get started. Okay. All right, and I think that we are troubleshooting on the back end to promote one of our panelists to panelist status so that she can share. But I will go ahead and do introductions, and then we'll kick off the conversation. So um, my name is Jessica George, and I am the Customer Experience Manager for the Western region of North America for Hypothesis. So you may have met me before on various workshops and also previous webinars and Liquid Margin episodes. I'm always happy to talk pedagogy or troubleshooting, so feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm going to jump to introduce Brandon Marshall, Professor of English and co-chair of the English department at Contra Costa Community College. We're really lucky to have Brandon, and we will also be joined by Lyra Stein, Associate Teaching Professor of Psychology at Rutgers. A little bit of troubleshooting going on the back end of things, so I will try to do my best to improvise here, but I will try to go ahead and get started. So let me bring up my demo first. Okay, so what is social annotation? When we've done liquid margins and webinars previously, we've received some responses from people unfamiliar with the tool. They'd love to know a look at a quick demo before we get into our conversation. So there's some reference point for what social annotation looks like, what the tool that our panelists are using looks like, and so on. So I am going to do a really brief demo here, just a couple minutes. If you're looking for a full demo, feel free to check out our Hypothesis YouTube channel or future workshops at our workshop page, and you'll be able to see a full presentation there. So the Hypothesis tool can be launched from any LMS. We are partnered with Canvas, D2L Brightspace, Sakai, Moodle, Blackboard, and so on. And when you launch your assignment, you'll always see something that looks like this. So no matter what LMS you're using, this is what the annotation toolbar will look like. So what you see here is a PDF for a business ethics class pulled into the Hypothesis tool, and layered over it is the annotation sidebar. What we like to say is that Hypothesis makes reading visible, active, and social. So this is or can be a discussion board alternative where instead of prompting students with a discussion prompt outside of the reading, which can discourage students from actually doing the reading and reference the reading as they're generating their responses, this is routing students back to the text, and they can make comments, questions, what we call annotations on top of the text using the annotation bar. So the way you would do that is select text, select annotate, and make your comment. You can post privately or to the rest of your class. And what you see here in the sidebar is the kinds of threaded discussions that can occur on top of the text. So really, we're looking for active, close reading, specific engagement with text. And you can also use page notes and make comments with page notes to make unanchored annotations. This can be helpful if you are prompting students with more general discussion prompts, allowing them to not have to respond to a specific point in the text, and they can engage the text that way as well. So that's just a quick overview, and I want to get to our conversation here. So I will do our quick introductions again. Thanks, Lyra, for your patience in getting set up on the back end. So again, our panelists today are Dr. Lyra Stein, Associate Teaching Professor of Psychology at Rutgers University, and Brandon Marshall, Professor of English and Co-Chair of the English Department at Contra Costa Community College. So I will get started with our first question. And again, the discussion today is how to get students to read. So our first question for our panelists, and I'll start with you, Brandon. What do you think is the biggest obstacle preventing students from engaging with course readings today?
Such a good question. I teach a literacy narrative at the beginning of every one of my kind of freshman composition courses to try to gauge some of that, kind of the barriers. And I think by and large, some of the barriers that come with that for students to read really come from early experiences in the classroom with reading and early kind of experiences with teachers who had I don't want to say kind of a narrow scope on interpretation or what things mean. I remember showing kind of doing a poetry and telling my students, "Hey, we're going to read some poetry today," and almost everybody just groaned in the class. I'm like, "What? No, this is a great poem. You're going to love it. Why don't you guys want to read poetry?" And they're like, "Well, because I never get it. I never understand it. Every time I try to say something, I've been told that I was wrong." And I think that we get a lot of young people who are now kind of really shy about sharing because they feel that they have been put down, called out or made to feel that they were dumb or they just didn't understand because they didn't get that they basically weren't able to read the mind of their teacher at the time and over time over many years that has tended to really erode their confidence and where they don't even often want to try because they're kind of self-defeating from the beginning.
Thanks. That's really helpful for thinking about how we approach our pedagogy in the
Mhm.
classroom and um, not being, especially perhaps in humanities, English, and so on, not being super prescriptive and
Mhm.
directing students to our own interpretations, but allowing them to explore and create that knowledge together
Mhm. Exactly.
before kind of arriving at perhaps some shared understandings of the text. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Lyra, can you share what you were thinking in terms of this challenges to student reading?
Yes. What I've noticed over the years is even if a reading is assigned, students will not read it. And I actually sent out a survey as to why they may not read it. And I got the overarching reason was cognitive overload. Many students juggle multiple courses, part time jobs, extracurricular activities, social obligations, and they find it taxing to actually focus on, I guess, a reading of substantial length.
Something that is coming to me that maybe links both of these answers is uh, Brandon, do you find students maybe shortcutting readings or just overlooking reading altogether because they assume that the instructor wants a prescribed answer? So why should they kind of work through things themselves when they're already overloaded if at the end of the day there's just going to be one understanding of the text anyway? Does
Mhm.
that come up at all
Mhm.
with
I
your
think it does come
students?
up because I have asked them. I maintain close communication with all my students and try to conference with people on a regular basis, and I'll ask them personally, about this, and they well, you're going to explain it in class the next day anyway, and they kind of start to rely on that. Why do I need to do the reading if it's just going to be lectured on right away? Um, and so I've tried to start to turn that around a little bit and flip it and let them know that we're going to apply what we read in the next class, and we're going to create some kind of the multimodal multimedia projects that apply what we learned. So it's not just me lecturing anymore on the meaning of that. So I'm trying to decenter the authority a little bit.
I really like that phrase of decentering the authority. Thanks for that. So I want to also talk about shifts in student reading habits and how you've tried to address them. So just kind of building off this idea, and I'll turn it back to you, Brandon. Um, are there things you've noticed? I'm thinking especially of the context of generative AI. Has this been
Yeah.
influencing student reading habits? Anything you're noticing and what you've done to address them in your classroom?
Oh, I think every semester, student reading habits are continually kind of changing. Generative AI has absolutely started to kind of pop in where students are, we're just kind of putting in summarize this article for me, and then we get this long jargony nonsense that kind of comes out of that. So one of the ways that I've tried to kind of move away from the impact that generative AI has on that is I choose texts that I think are open and rich. I'm an English teacher, so I get to teach literature a lot of the time. And so instead of teaching the quote canonical books, and I've started to look for more obscure kind of YA books for the young. I mean, our students are young adults. Mine are very young adults, mostly 17 to 18 years old, first semester college students. So I look for those types of books that aren't overwrought. There aren't a million people writing about them in the interwebs. And so when students do try to use AI, one student even told me that hey, I asked AI if it knew this book, and it said, not really. I might get some things wrong. And so a few people did, and it was blatantly obvious. Like, oh, there is no love interest in this book, but AI really wants to add one. And so I've tried to use that a little bit to kind of shift. So just kind of stuff that is more targeted to my demographic of students, but it also just isn't as pronounced everywhere, and it's not overly taught.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been noticing articles. Well, you have probably already seen many of these about the reading crisis and students not reading for their college classes. And yet, we know that young people are reading. They may just not
Definitely.
be reading for their college class. I know Book Talk is really popular. People even sharing their digital annotations and things like that. So it's context dependent. It sounds like, and
Mhm.
that's really helpful. You know, um, trying to build or um, develop intrinsic motivation being dependent on student interest. And we know that's the case through research into education and things like that as well. Lyra, coming from a psychology background, I am wondering if you've noticed shifts in student reading habits, how you've addressed them. Your context is a little bit different because you may not be able to, select those YA novels for your courses. So what do you do for kind of traditional type academic reading as well?
Yeah, so in my psychopathology course, we use case studies. And before using hypothesis, I would ask them to read it and then ask them questions, and it was obvious no one read it. So once I switched to hypothesis and I used targeted prompts, so they had to really dive into certain parts of the text to get credit. They were definitely reading more, understanding more in class when I would ask questions, and communicating with each other more on the hypothesis platform.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. So when you're talking about prompts, are you talking about general prompts that you've given them kind of outside of the annotation assignment, or do you also leave prompts within the text that you're assigning to students as annotation for them to respond to?
Yeah, I leave the prompts in the page notes of the annotations, and I have them decide amongst themselves who's going to focus on what. And so, one person, at least one person, is going to be an expert on diagnosis or treatment or prognosis. And then I have them comment on each other's because I don't want them just to focus on one part. So they are also required to engage and analyze their peers' analysis. And when they do that, they also have to read and highlight the areas that they are focusing on.
That's really helpful. And there has been some research, recent peer-reviewed research on social annotation and participatory roles, and it sounds like you're building off of that. So assigning students specific reading roles in their small groups so they are accountable for answering particular kinds of questions or doing designated types of synthesizing and so on. That way everybody is responsible for um, their part in the collaborative reading is what I'm hearing you describe there. And I know that that has been really helpful for other faculty as well. Great. Thank you for helping us lay out kind of the foundation for this conversation. I want to move more specifically into student engagement and motivation. And I know Brandon talked specifically about, incorporating readings that students are actually interested in and applying concepts and maybe, practicing the identification of literary devices using those texts that they like. So I'm going to pose the next question to both of you. I'll begin again with Brandon. How can educators balance the need for accountability with fostering intrinsic motivation to read? And so this is like, how do we ensure that they actually open the text, do the reading, but also foster the motivation to do the reading, so it's not just feeling like a chore, but we're also trying to develop like enthusiasm for this activity as well.
Okay. So I do a lot of work on like kind of explicitly connecting what they're about to read um, to their lived experiences. I want to forge those connections between what we're doing in class and what they have lived through. So, for example, I do a lot of work with microaggressions and kind of working within recognizing those microaggressions and understanding kind of how those have been impacting students. And so we read a lot of stuff within that context, right? We might read firsthand accounts of folks who have experienced these. Then we'll also read the kind of psychological um, journal articles in which they look at how people are impacted as a result of these types of microaggressions, and kind of use little bit of an activity kind of to get started with it, and just how many people have kind of felt this, right? Does this experience sound familiar? And students will chime in, oh yeah, 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 and I'm just summarizing what we're going to read, and they've already kind of formed that they're connecting with that. And so in the classroom, I'll just kind of really do that explicitly. In an online class, I'll leave a video in the hypothesis directions in which I kind of lay out, how it connects to some of the experiences that they've had and kind of why it's important to start to understand the experiences of other people within different different identification groups so that they can start to understand, oh, okay, it's not just me, I'm not alone. There a lot of people are experiencing some of these same things. And so I think that as students can start to see themselves in what they're about to read, that they do get a little bit more excited, and it doesn't become a chore. It becomes a kind of an exploration that they tend to enjoy.
Thanks for that. I'll pass it to Lyra before summarizing this section.
My context is a little different. I have students use annotations in anticipation of working on a case study during class the next day. So they quickly come to realize that they have to have their part carefully read and understood to be able to contribute this to the discussion. It starts out and at the beginning of the semester, usually students, they don't do much and they realize that this is a detriment once they get to the class discussion and they realize that their peers are counting on them because they hand this in together to understand that part. And I usually assign one person to oversee all of the annotations before the discussion. So that one person will look through it. And if there's one student who didn't really go in depth, that person will reach out and say, we really need this for the discussion tomorrow. Can you do a little more analysis? Can you read this more carefully? So instead of me supervising them, it's a collaborative where they each want to be able to tell the rest of the group exactly what was going on in the case study.
Both of these answers are really helpful, and I wanted to address a little bit about each of them. So one of the things that came up for me, Brandon, as you were describing your connections to lived experiences, is the idea of making literature the site where students are exploring big philosophical, ethical questions that they come into contact with on a daily basis, but maybe don't have a chance to explore in their average classroom environment. And here's this great audience and community where they can do this work, all using the text as kind of the basis or object of study while they are exploring these philosophical questions and ethical questions that really do interest them, but they may not have a chance to kind of parse through in any other space maybe than the college classroom. And is that kind of how you think of this, an opportunity for them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we study the literature in order to kind of study ourselves and the world in which that literature was created. I also teach a pretty popular class on post-apocalyptic literature,
Oh,
and
wow.
I couch it in the terms that, by looking at what collectively a society is kind of viewing as their end tells us a lot about what that society values or what is going on within the world that they're coming from and what their views and values tend to be. And so it gives us that critical distance to really kind of look at at our world in interesting ways. But absolutely, yeah.
That sounds like an awesome class that I know many of us here would love to take. Um, Lyra, one thing that came up for me when I was listening to you talk is um, the experience that students are getting from your class in being scientists and researchers and learning that you can't take a passive role in doing that kind of work. Um, I know this is for psychology classes, but is that kind of perspective of researcher something you see them taking on with the accountability that you're assigning to them with these kinds of assignments?
Oh, definitely. I always ask for reflections on their experience, and they say this kind of accountability has made them actually focus more on what they're reading and the meaning behind it. Because I don't ask them superficial questions. It's more like, okay, connect this to what we learned in class through the annotations. So it's not just the reading, but it's incorporating the content because they know that they're going to have to use both of those together for the discussion. So it does help them understand the preliminary diagnoses and to question. So I do a lot of, what do you think of this based on what we learned in class? Why was this a good diagnosis or not the best diagnosis? And they report back that they were critically thinking about this, which they would not have done had I not forced them to focus on that specific part of the content.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am going to move us into the section about reading and social annotation, and feel free to, I know that our panelists did some prep work before this, so feel free to weave in anything from the student engagement section as well. Um, so again, I'm going to jump to just my screen share, so anyone who joined a little bit um, later can take a look at what the toolbar looks like, and then we'll jump back into the panelist discussion. But when Brandon and Lyra are talking about annotations, this is what they, along the lines of what they're using. So using a PDF, we can also use web pages and YouTube videos to make annotations over text. And these annotations are always anchored to a specific point in the text. So that is the kind of discussion work that these students that they're describing are doing uh, before coming to class in preparation for discussion in person and then online as well. So let's talk a little bit about social annotation strategies, and I apologize, I will start dipping into our Q&A as well because I know there are questions coming in, and I was so focused on our panelists that I forgot to be monitoring that. So Brandon, what social annotation strategies specifically have you
Hmm.
incorporated into your course readings?
Oh, quite a few. I can share a couple of things. If I can share a screen. Um,
Oh yeah,
I
let me
just put together a
uh,
couple Canvas pages. I can kind of show a couple of techniques that I have been using, and some of the instructions that set that up.
and on the
Oh, I'm
back
good. I
end,
can share.
oh, you can, okay,
I can share.
good.
Yeah. All right. Going to be this one, but it's over here. Okay. So one of the things that I just started doing is call it AI illustrations of the novel, and kind of put together a novel. And then one of the things I'm asking students to do is to kind of use AI to, well, first to identify some lessons that our protagonist is learning as they grow and they come of age, that they find to be important. That's what they're going to write about a little bit later on. And so in order to kind of get them to kind of dig into their own on this importance of this situation and this lesson, one of the things I ask them to do is to uh, find those moments and then to illustrate the text using kind of AI. And so we've gone over some of the prompting for AI and how to use. This was made with, I think, Dolly, or so many of them out there. They change all the time. But then they're able to kind of, okay, here's an image, and they start to discuss how did the text how did the text inform their image, right? And how did they perceive of this moment in the text, right? And so they're able to kind of make this text come alive for themselves, which I think is kind of interesting. And so this is just kind of a mock-up of what it looks like. I pulled some of the work that they that have been doing, and I just kind of driving to work last semester, brainstormed it, and so it's pretty raw. But I'm refining the approach to it, so it'll get more pronounced. And we ended up having them write an essay in which I had them pick 5 major lessons that they created these images for, and then write about the significance of why they chose to create the image the way they did. So they're really interested in it because they're super interested in AI, even if they might be scared of it as well. But that's one of the techniques that I've been using a lot. Um, Another one that I like a lot is I love using your tag function uh, in the text and when I set these texts up. So here I have taught them. They've done a bunch of kind of choose your own adventure literary techniques, imagery, word choice, line choice, uh, um, form on the page. There's a number of other different ones. They learn about 20 of them throughout the course of a semester. And then when I have them, after that, I have them study those and work with those different techniques and learn about them. Then I will have them use them in um, in their text, right? And so I would then have them kind of sign in here and go, ooh, you know, this word choice is amazing. Like to start home with silence is striking. And then what I would have them do here is add a tag, and that tag would be, word choice or imagery, right? And so here they're able to start to kind of show, okay, what tool did you use in order to access this text? And so it's kind of a fun one that we can use with that one. Um, um, I don't have it here, but I've also had them do what I call in the moment hashtags. So using the tag function is just kind of a social media style hashtag. So as they're reading through it, what is going through your mind in that moment in time? It's not about an interpretation, but with literature, sometimes that emotional response it's the first cue that something in that text matters to you. So I'll have them to start using those moments. Like sometimes they get creative with it. At the end of one of the books we read, it's a super beautiful moment. One of my students put hashtag I'm not crying at it. They do a lot of these other things like I'm angry or I'm super confused about what's going on, but it's just kind of really um, you know um, in the moment way to engage with the text. So I find that those really help them personalize their experience and get into it, and then compare notes with their classmates, and they can see how other folks are, um, engaging in a lot of the same ways that they are.
Those are very fascinating. First, I love this idea of using technology to create visual interpretations of literature. So kind of like instead of a textual analysis, kind of moving and analyzing the text using this AI feature that you've allowed students to incorporate. That's
It
awesome.
redirects. If I say analyze
Mhm.
something, then sometimes they're like, oh no, that's academic. But if I'm like, hey,
Mhm.
what does this look like to you? And how did the words on the page kind of tell you that? Then suddenly they're analyzing and they don't even know it, and they're doing amazing work without getting caught up in this definition and this kind of academic fear.
Yeah, and just tagging off of that, with the waterfall hashtags that you were describing, where they're just responding with their first thing that comes to mind, that is i- is very familiar because in our workshops we like to emphasize that social annotation is meant to be informal and conversational. We're not at least most faculty that I've talked to aren't looking for a formal like 3-paragraph analysis of a part of a text. And that's what makes it special, is it's that kind of natural type conversation that happens in discussion. So that was just something that came to mind as you were describing that. Lyra, I'm going to pass this back to you. And then also we have a question in Q&A for you, which I will spend some time with after you respond to the question of what social annotation strategies have you used?
Yeah, speaking of AI, so I try to incorporate AI literacy into all of my courses because I'm almost 100% sure that students will have to learn how to use it after they graduate. So I have them use a free platform, and when they're incorporating course material into their analysis of the case studies, I then ask them to I use ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT what they think about this. And they have to put the output in and they have to analyze it in terms of what the case study says and bring in the course material. So they just can't copy and paste from ChatGPT. They have to compare it to what we've talked about in class. And they also have to indicate the strengths and weaknesses of the output. What is this good for? What is AI not so good for? What have you learned in class and through the case study that AI may not have picked up on? And I try to focus on them critically evaluating output instead of thinking about it as a way to cut corners, to summarize. So I always say you have to incorporate what we talked about in class in your annotations. And I want you to compare that to the AI output. I also use social tags, and it helps them when they come in for the group discussion, they can use those annotations. So they just use the tags to go in, okay, diagnosis. If we compare this diagnosis to this outcome, what does that tell us about the overall holistic, therapy and would help this client specifically?
So I just want to pause and say these these panelists are both awardees of our Social Learning Innovator Award, and I think that you can probably tell that from the kinds of classroom activities and experiences that they're describing. And I'll also mention that although social annotation is a great way to increase like pedagogical friction, is how I've seen it described before. So kind of slowing down the reading by requiring students to make comments and questions. It's a pedagogically flexible tool, and the moments of magic are really going to be dependent upon your own teacherly ethos and your personal pedagogy. So not relying on the tool to do that for you, but kind of using it to complement the kind of critical thinking activities that you already are doing in class, whether online or face-to-face. And I hear that in the scenarios that Brandon and Lyra are both describing here. Related to your group work activities, question for Lyra, how do you organize your class to assign the different tasks? I think they are looking for information about how you're dividing students into groups, kind of divisions of labor, how you make those kinds of choices.
Well, so we use Canvas, and Hypothesis is great for group work because you just show the prompts to the group, and I have I have classes of maybe 350 students, and they're not used to this small group interaction, but I put them into groups of 6. So they have their own hypothesis board to work on. And I think each group develops their own style. And it takes some time. By mid-semester, they've gotten the division of labor down. They always give feedback to me after every annotation. I say, okay, how helpful was this students annotation for your discussion, and they'll let me know if someone isn't really focusing on the important part, so I can reach out to that student and say, your group would like you to focus on this a little more, go a little more in depth with your annotation. So by the end, and I don't want to intervene too much because I want them to work on relationship building skills and skills they'll need after they graduate. Most of the time they work it out between themselves, the time management, making sure that the workload is equal for all 6 individuals in the group. And if there's a problem, they'll usually let me know and I'll try to intervene to make sure it is equal for all of them.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. There's a question in chat, so I'm going to share my screen. Someone asking about the annotations, I think possibly getting distracting as students or even the instructor is passing through the reading the first time. So with the hypothesis social annotation tool, you can turn or hide, I should say, the sidebar and the annotations. And this can be helpful for questions related to maybe students getting too distracted before they've even taken a first pass in the reading. So the way you would do this is just close the sidebar with this caret, or if you want to leave the sidebar open, you can also hide the highlights. So that is one way that I tell faculty that one way to help managing those distractions. So I will stop sharing and I'll get back to our questions here. So this is a question that has come up for me a couple times in the past couple of months. How do you encourage students to move beyond surface level comments and engage in meaningful dialogue within the text? So I'll just preface this by saying, with this tool, you can just have students make those annotations. Maybe you want them to make 2 original annotations and reply to 2 students, but that can lead to just recreating some of the problems with traditional discussion boards. So kind of how do you navigate this? Do you talk to them about different kinds of taxonomies of knowledge and annotations, or what does that look like in your class? And I'll hand that to Brandon first.
I think it really all begins with the clarity of the instructions, so that students are very, very clear about what's expected of them and kind of what you want them to do. I can share real quick one more time here and look at a different little piece of this assignment. I'll go to a different one of these. Say something like the. Well, that's not the right one. So this is using a different app, but one of the things I want them to do is my students are all burgeoning scholars, just kind of finding their way as college students, and so they need that kind of scaffolding and that guidance rather than saying, hey, I want you to annotate 3 times and respond to 2 people. Like they're going to often default to the surface level because they're not sure at all what you're looking for. They're used to kind of recall questions in high school in which they just have to answer, okay, this is the light was green at the end of Gatsby or whatever, but here, so I use some response techniques that they come from a program called kind of Reader Apprenticeship. It's a post-secondary kind of reading program that have certification in, but I give them some kind of prompts, right? So here you read silently, talk to the text, but pay attention to these places. And so giving them kind of some guidelines of where you can start to connect with the text. Where does it raise questions? Where does it confirm some of the things you already believe? Where does it make you say, oh, yeah, of course? Where does it conflict with your beliefs? Where does it cause you to reconsider some prior assumptions? Or where does it remind you of other things that you have read? So making cross connections, or where does it remind you of a class discussion, things that we have talked about in the discussion, and kind of give them that perspective. I also will often provide them with an AI illustration novel, I'll give them a lot of guidance in terms of, okay, here's how you use hypothesis, right? And so this comes from the hypothesis website, and I just give them some guidance here so that they're not kind of left on their own. So really comes to guidance. Uh, Formerly, before being a department co-chair, I was an instructional designer on my campus as well, and so I work with a lot of faculty, and I'm a hypothesis cheerleader, and I'm out there trying to get as many people to use it as possible. And have faculty come back to me, "Oh, my students hate it; they won't do it." I'm like, "Well, let's take a look," and open up the design, and there is literally like no instructions, maybe respond 4 times, and that's all that is in there. So that's all of the context. And I'm like, well, no wonder your students have no idea what you want them to do. So it's going to feel they're going to have that amygdala hijacked. They're going to feel panicked, right? They're not going to know what they're supposed to do, and they're going to skip, and they're going to hate it. But by really setting the context and being present within that moment, whether online or on campus, you can be present in their experience and really guide their exploration. Right? We are a facilitator. We are guides. We should be present as much as we possibly can. So I think that forms the real solid foundation of student success within social annotation.
That's really, really a great reminder and of the role of confidence and feeling supported in doing our best work professionally, academically, as students, as faculty. And it reminds me of a comment I received from a student about annotation. Um, and these were their words that they had anxiety about even sharing. Um, in a simple annotation. It wasn't even a big discussion prompt of, 4 paragraphs. It was just simply going in and like making the mark on the text because they hadn't done it before. But I see in your instructions there, that's really giving students specific guidance and encouragement about how to use the tool, which can be really, really helpful, especially in those first times that they're
Mhm.
engaging with the text in
Right.
that way. Lyra, I know that it's a different context for you, social sciences, psychology, um, but and surface level might look different. I'm actually wondering what surface level means for instructor of psychology and what you would be looking for in deeper annotations in the types of classes that you're teaching.
Right. So surface level, what students don't get points for is just reiterating, paraphrasing what's in the case study. And they learn quickly that they really have to dive into it and analyze it in terms of what we talked about in class. So I'll ask very specific questions. What did the therapist pick up on for the diagnosis? Use what we learned in class to evaluate that. And then when they have to respond to someone else, let's say someone's doing treatment, I say, go to the annotation for diagnosis. And if these symptoms were different, what do you think would happen? So they have to engage with each other and they have to bring in course material, and I have them bring in AI. So they can't just paraphrase it. That's how the semester starts. They're just paraphrasing. And then they realize I give them constant feedback on their points and I say you have to go into more depth. You have to show me that you understand it, because when you come in for your group discussion, that kind of paraphrasing is not going to be adequate for the group, what the group hands in.
That's really helpful. So to our panelists, I'm going to pose probably 2 more questions before I jump into our wrap up. And I am going to ask about, and this comes up frequently with other faculty that I speak with, how do you track and analyze student engagement to identify areas of support? And I think this is an important question because if students are getting really involved in the annotation work that you both are describing, um, the documents become covered with annotations. And how do you manage like tracking student work through this, identifying points where they might need your intervention and support in the way that you're describing, Lyra. Is it tags that you use, or are you continually monitoring these? And how do you balance that with all of the other work that you're doing as a faculty member? Brandon, I'll have you respond first.
Well, all of the above that you bring up. I'm present within the hypothesis assignments the whole time. Yeah, I like to use the tags. So if a student is like this is Marxism, and I'm like, well, not so much. Then I'll use that opportunity to connect with them off the app. I never correct students on the app. I might ask questions or guide things, but I'll never call students out kind of in public on the app. But I'll just connect with them afterwards and say, hey, in the comments, you call this Marxism, but remember, let's go back to these resources. This is where Marxism is going to entail. Maybe, if you want to use this as Marxism, ask them some questions. Where do you see this happening, or that, or something of that nature? And that's all I will talk about it. But yeah, I'm constantly present when I'm on the I don't type a lot of words when I'm on Hypothesis. So I don't use a lot of text. I'm like a cheerleader. I use a lot of emojis. And like if it's a really good idea, I'll use one of the little investigators with a magnifying glass. Or if someone just kind of goes off on something, I'll put a little fire emoji or something of that nature, just to show that I'm here, I'm reading, and I appreciate what you're doing and where you're at. And that's basically how I'll keep track of that engagement, and then I'll connect off the app to further their knowledge.
That's a great way of building student rapport too, by messaging them privately, kind of showing them that you are looking at the things that they're writing, and but not trying to maybe correct them publicly if it's more of a thing that you think should be discussed in a one-on-one. So that's a nice reminder as well. Lyra, how do you track all of the things going on in your case study and readings along those lines?
Sure. So I usually end up having about 50 different groups, and they each have their own platform for Hypothesis, so it doesn't become overwhelming. And there's this wonderful feature through Canvas called SpeedGrader, where I can look at each individual student's contribution separately, which really helps. And I leave them feedback on each of their annotations. I'll ask them follow-up questions. So only they will see my feedback. They don't have it posted for their whole group to see. And then they can respond to my follow-up question for full credit. So usually they'll go back, and this is how they understand how to go more in depth. And even if they get it wrong a second time, I'll go back and say, try again, try this technique. And that really helps them. And I'm amazed by the end of the semester, they've all got it down, and I barely have to leave any comments. But it's really at the beginning, giving them individualized feedback and letting them know what they need to do to improve their annotations.
Thank you for that. And yes, for Canvas users, the SpeedGrader function looks much like it does for a traditional discussion board, and it will auto sort the students' contributions. So you can leave personalized feedback in the SpeedGrader, but you could also just respond to their annotations within SpeedGrader so that your feedback is also an annotation, which is a nice little feature there. I'm going to end us with our last question before some wrap-up information about future workshops and so on. So Brandon, if you could give one piece of advice to educators struggling to get students to read, what would it be?
I thought about this pretty long and hard. I would say like just like really make sure to communicate with your students. About what they do and what they don't want to read, and what kind of issues they are having, and what kind of obstacles they might be encountering. And don't accept often they'll just say, "Oh, it's just me, I'm lazy. It's not you, it's not anything." I'm just lazy. I just, I'm just playing video games all the time. And I pushed them and pushed them a little bit, because students just aren't, they're not lazy. They're doing so many things. And so I want to kind of get to the heart of where it's at, and where they're at. And generally, pushing a little bit, you'll find that they have a big anxiety about it. And so having that one-on-one conversation and just asking some questions with them starts to kind of melt that anxiety away. And so that the laziness and stepping away from reading, it's all, I think, anxiety based. Well, not probably not all this, but heavily anxiety based. And so we can, by having relationships and real relationships with our students, we can start to melt that away as much as possible.
I have noticed the self-deprecation too that you're describing as kind of like it, not an excuse, but the answer that they'll go to. One
It's a
thing that
deflection.
I am teaching a literature class this semester, and we began with a article on deep reading. It wasn't too intense of an article, but it was an interesting reflection for them to actually think about what's happening up in their mind as they are reading, which is something that I don't think they spend a lot of time thinking about, like the actual cognitive process of reading. So that could be a helpful idea for anyone on this call as well. Lyra, what piece of advice would you give to instructors?
Um, what I would say is, and it took me a few years to get to this, they're not going to read the whole thing. And I've just come to that. So you give each group member a different part they're responsible for. If for some reason they don't understand it, their group members will assist them. And I find that there are group members that will say, well, maybe you can do this in a constructive manner. And they will, I ask them for anonymous feedback. Do you think this person really analyzed this part of the text? And if they say no, they may need a little help, then I'll work with that person. But I think they get more out of it when their whole group is going to see what they put on there, and their whole group knows that they're going to use that for the discussion. So instead of just saying, oh, I don't care about this grade, you're actually being accountable to other people in your group.
That again sounds kind of similar to what a peer review activity would look like in the professional world as well. So thanks for sharing that. I am going to wrap up with some slides, but thank you so much, Brandon and Lyra, for all these great ideas. It's really inspiring to hear all of the strategies you've used. And Brandon, thanks for screen sharing as well. That was super helpful, I know. For anyone on the call, just a note that we have a free Hypothesis Academy starting soon. If you're interested in getting to know, what social annotation looks like, we'll discuss pedagogical ideas as well. I've put a link to that in chat. But I did want to announce that we also have a really great feature rolling out later this year at Mentions, which I think will also help both of our panelists here. So you'll be able to tag participants in your discussion so that they know that they've been mentioned, pulling them back into the discussion that way. So we're hoping that that also helps further support student engagement while also helping instructors. So that will be launching later this semester. And just a note for anyone on the call, we have a Kickstart promotion. So discounted pricing, no cost implementation, access to our resources, and so on. So feel free to email education@Hypothesis to learn more. And then we have another webinar coming up next month. So that will focus on new features such as participation auto grading that rolled out last December, as well as some information about app mentioning, other sorts of helpful features to just make your lives easier as faculty and learning designers, if there are any on the call here. So I will go ahead and end on a final note. We have our Annotate Ed conference in April, and we're looking for participants. So feel free to submit your abstract. We'll be sending out information on that, but you can also check out the website for more on how to do that. And in the meantime, thank you everyone for attending. I look forward to meeting with you. And thanks again, Brandon and Lyra, for such great ideas today. I do really appreciate it. And as an instructor myself, I always get super excited to hear what other people are doing in the classroom. So thank you both so much. And until next time.